Today's shiur begins at the beginning of the new perek, the 8th perek Koinim Yayin of Maseches Nedarim. So we begin at the Mishnah, Koinim Yayin Shani Toyim. A person takes upon himself a vow, using the konam expression, that he will not partake of wine, and he mentions hayom. As you can see in the Mishnah, there are several examples. They're noted Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Just scan down and you'll see different examples by way of time. So in the first example, he says, I am not going to partake of wine, hayom. What does that mean when you say today? Eino osur elo ad shetechshach. The restriction applies only until darkness. At the end of the day, meaning at sundown, that is the end of the day. The new day begins with the appearance of 3 stars, which we learn from the psukim in the Torah, which says, Vahi Erev, Vahi Boker. The day begins at Erev, at the night. Hence, when he says, I am prohibiting myself from wine, Hayom, today, the end of the day is with the upcoming of the evening. If he says Shabbos Zu, the word Shabbos in the Shas you'll find very often is a reference to a week. So he says this week, Osur B'chol HaShabbos, the Shabbos L'She'ovar. So let us say, for example, he is vowing on a Tuesday, and he says, I prohibit myself from consuming wine, I self-imposed prohibition. And he says, this week, Shabbos Zu, the vow will last until the end of the week Shabbos. In other words, if he's vowing on Tuesday, so the wine will be prohibited to him Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and including Shabbos. Shabbos, the shofar means that Shabbos at the end of the week goes with the previous days. Chodesh Zeh, he vows to prohibit himself from wine this month. Osur b'chol hachodesh, v'rosh chodesh lahabo. So he's osur. He cannot partake of wine for the month, for the balance of the month. However, Rosh Chodesh, the day on which we commemorate the new month, that is part of the next month. That's lehabo. In contrast to the word lisha'ovar that we saw the line before, labo means it is connected with the next month. So when Rosh Chodesh arrives, he is not prohibited. That might sound obvious. The Gemara will deal with that. A person vows, and he says, Shona Zu, this year, also b'chol Hashana, the Rosh Hashanah le'usid lovoi. When Rosh Hashanah comes, so that holiday that we celebrate as the New Year, that is attached with the next year. Hence, he would not be prohibited in drinking wine on Rosh Hashanah. Shavua zeh, the term Shavua in this context is a reference to a group of 7 years. The sabbatical, the Shemitah cycle. So he prohibits himself from consuming wine. Shavua zeh. Osur b'chol hashavua u'shvius she'ovra. So he's prohibited during the balance of the sabbatical unit, and the sabbatical year, the Shemitah year, which is called Shvius, that too is included. It goes along with the past years. The Im Omar, if he vowed Yom Echad, he imposed upon himself a restriction not to consume wine, Yom Echad. Notice, this expression is different than the term Hayom that you saw at the first line of the Mishnah. It says Yom Echad, or Shabbos Achas, Chodesh Echad, Shana Achas, Shavua Echad. The result of vowing in that form, Osur Miyoim Liyom, it becomes a vow that is binding from the date on which he took the vow till the next time that date appears. For example, the case of Yom Echad basically would mean he's prohibited for 24 hours. That if he vowed 10 in the morning on Monday and he said Yom Echad, so he will be prohibited till 10 in the morning on Tuesday. If he vowed on a Monday at 3 p.m. and he said Shabbos Achas, So he will be prohibited till Monday, 3 p.m., 1 week later. And so on and so forth with the examples. A new set of times and vows. A person says, Ad HaPesach, Ozer Ad Shiagia. The term Ad HaPesach, until Pesach, means that whatever he is restricting himself, if he's restricting himself in drinking wine, and he says Ad HaPesach, it means until the arrival of Pesach, until it comes. Ad Shiyahe, if he says Kainim Yayin Shenitoyim Ad Shi, using that expression, Ad Shiyahe, also Ad Shiyetze. If he says Ad Shiyahe HaPesach, it means until the passage of Pesach. In other words, the vow will be binding on him throughout the entire holiday of Pesach as well. If he says Ad Penei HaPesach, this is a third expression. Here you have a machlokas Tanim Rabbi Meir Omer Oser Ad Sheyagia. That Ad Penei means you'll be prohibited until it arrives, and Rabbi Yossi Omer Ad Oser Ad Sheyetzei, a longer period of time. You will be prohibited until Pesach concludes, until it passes. And now we arrive at the Gemara, and we reflect upon the opening example, Koinim Yain Shenitoyim. The Gemara quotes that, Koinim Yain Shenitoyim Hayom Einu Osur Elo Ad Shetechshach. He is prohibited until just until darkness. Now Rabbi Yirmiyah introduces a stringency. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Omar Rabbi Yirmiyah, when darkness sets in, he has to go through, on a procedural basis, the rescinding of the vow through approaching a Torah sage who will absolve him of the vow. Now you're probably asking, but the vow anyway expired automatically upon darkness. What is Rav Yirmiyah insisting on? Why does he say that you need to have the vow absolved? And the Gemara answers, My taima, Omer of Yosef, Gezero Hayom Mishum Yom Echad. We are worried that people will confuse things. A vow in which he says Hayom, so we know that it ends at darkness. However, a vow, and we saw this in the Mishnah, if he says Kainim Yashnitoyim Yom Echad, that doesn't end at darkness. If he took the vow at 10 in the morning on Monday, he's prohibited until 10 in the morning on Tuesday. However, he might think that just like the vow of Hayom ends at darkness, a vow of Yom Echad also ends at darkness, and that would be a mistake. Let us take a look at the Rashi. Tzorich she'elo l'chocham. The Rashi we're looking at together is around 6 lines from the bottom. Rav Yirmiyah says that when darkness comes after having vowed Kainim Yayin Shnitoyim Hayom, he has to approach a sage for absolution of the vow. Lahatir loy nidro mishum hekeira. In order to create something recognizable. What's the purpose of creating something recognizable? In other words, truth is, you don't need to have it absolved by letter of the law, but we want you anyway to do this. If we leave things at the letter of the law and say that, well, when darkness arrives, that's the end of the day, and now you can drink wine, Osu L'meimar nami, people will come to say, likewise, ki nodar yom echad v'yoyim b'chatzi hayoim. If he vowed not to drink wine yom echad, and he's vowing in the middle of the day, that he can start drinking wine anew upon darkness. V'hu lo have mutar ad me'es le'es, and in truth, he is not allowed until the passage of 24 hours. Hilkoch tzorch she'lo l'chacham, and therefore we insist when you take a vow that prohibits you from drinking for the day, you have to absolve it with a sage. And since you're approaching the sage, the Chacham will ask you, well, what was the text of your vow? How did you phrase the vow? And you won't come to the violation of a vow. In other words, at the end of the day, you're going to consult with a Chacham, you're going to seek his absolution, and he'll ask you what was the text of your vow, and if you say Hayom, so say, okay, you're free of your vow. But at that very moment, he might discover that you said Yom Echad, and he'll put you on the right track and say, hey, you can't drink wine yet. You have to wait till the same time tomorrow that you had vowed yesterday concerning the wine. So this recommendation or this requirement of Rabbi Yirmiyah will protect the vower from violating a vow. You notice that we have a trapezoid marking around Rav Yosef on the side of the Gemara under the Nosei, Mivneh heading. The Nosei is the topic, and Mivneh the structural. Well, we just began the topic, but the marking that you see is Hezberim L'Dinsha Rav Yirmiyah. These are explanations for why Rav Yirmiyah requires the She'ela L'Chacham upon nightfall. The Mishnodar Lo Lishtos Yayin Hayom, one who vowed not to drink wine Hayom, today, Afapi Shemutir Techshach, even though it's technically speaking mutter for him to start drinking, to resume drinking upon nightfall. He nevertheless requires this. And the absolution with a Chacham, Rav Yosef gave us one explanation, namely that this will prevent a person who might have vowed from stumbling through the resumption of wine consumption upon nightfall. Omar, we continue now at the top of Omid Beis. Omar le Abaye ihachi. If that be the case, that it's Xera of Hayom in anticipation of someone having said Yom Echad, Ligzor b'Yom Echad Mishum Hayom. So there should be a requirement that one who vowed using the Yom Echad term, that he should be prohibited from drinking until nightfall of the next day. In other words, it will be more than 24 hours. Even though the Yom Echad vow, if you took a vow at 10 in the morning on Monday, you can resume drinking of wine 10 in the morning of Tuesday. But, we should tell him that you ought to hold off until nightfall in anticipation of someone who might have vowed a Hayom vow, who is required to wait till nightfall, so as not to stumble in that case where if you have someone who said Yom Echad stopping at the technically permitted time, 10 a.m. Tuesday morning, in our example where he vowed 10 a.m. Monday morning, if we have him stopping then, you can have a guy that took a vow using Hayom at 10 a.m. and think that when noontime comes, he can resume drinking, just like in the guy who said Yom Echad, he resumes drinking during the daytime. You can see this explanation in the Rashi. We'll learn it together. Top line, Ihachi Ligzor Yom Echad. A person who vowed the Yom Echad type vow, which was a 24-hour vow, let us prohibit him from resumption of wine consumption until nightfall of that next day, which will be more than 24 hours from the time he took the vow. Mishum Hayom, in anticipation of someone who would vow using the Hayom term. If you say that a Yom Echad person is prohibited for the 24-hour period and not anymore, also the Mishrinami ki omad b'shachris from Hayom, you'll come to allow a guy who vows at 10 a.m. in the morning using the Hayom expression. Also the Mishti, he'll come to start resumption of drinking b'chatzi Hayom at 12, v'hu aserat shetechshach, when in fact he is aser until darkfall. The Gemara answers Omar lei. Rav Yosef answers Hayom b'Yom Echad michlef. People who vowed Hayom will confuse it with Yom Echad. we look in the Rashi, Omar le Rav Yosef Hayom b'yom echad michlafti shoris Hayom nechashetechshach below sheila. If we allow the Hayom people to resume at nightfall, which is actually letter of law correct, but do so without a consultation with a chacham, without absolution from a chacham, michlif osila mishri, people will come to confuse and say Yom echad mishetechshach, that a person who vowed at 10 in the morning on Monday, saying, I won't drink wine for Yom Echad, he'll resume drinking at nightfall. The Savar, Yotza Osa Yom Shenodabo, the day ended, the day that I vowed, on which I vowed, finished. Kamo came, Vahu Eino Mutter Elo Meis Leis. So that is something to really worry about. That if you allow a person who said Hayom to resume at nightfall without a Sheilas Chacham, a guy who says Yom Echad will also resume at nightfall, and that's a real mistake. That's a real Michlaf, means a confusion. He'll confuse one with the other. However, Yom Echad beHayoim lo Michlaf. The other way around, people won't make mistakes. And here we look at Rashi again. Yom echad b'hayom lo michlif, di'afagav de'biyom echad lo asur lishtos l'mochar alayla. That when you vowed Yom echad, you are forbidden for 24 hours, and you don't have to wait till the evening. Meaning, you don't have to wait any more than 24 hours. Delo asi l'mishri b'hayom mechatzi yom ve'elech. By our allowing a Yom Echad vower to resume drinking 24 hours later, at, in our example, 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning, that's not going to lead to someone who vowed, using the Hayom expression, who vows at some time in the morning, to resume drinking at noontime. You don't have to worry about that. In that case, the day hasn't finished. Anyone who uses the term Hayom will know that he's not going to resume drinking at midday. The day hasn't finished. And because of this, a person who had vowed using the Yom Echad term, he doesn't need at the end of his 24 hours to seek absolution. So as to prevent a case of someone who said Hayom from resuming drinking at midday onwards. You don't have to worry about that situation. In that case, where a person vowed in the morning hours using the term Hayom, he's not going to come to resume drinking at noontime. The day hasn't even finished. He knows that it's Ozer for him to resume until nightfall. Let's continue in the Gemara. Omar Ravina. Now you see a new volcano shape, and a second, a base, indicating a second explanation for the Rav Yirmiyah ruling. Omar li Mereimar. So Ravina tells us that Mereimar had told him, Hachi Omar avuch mishmei Rav Yosef. Thusly says your father, in the name of Rav Yosef. There might be girsos to take out Yosef, and it would be mishmei de Rav. This would be a little more convenient for us so that we don't have, let's say, a split opinion as to what Rav Yosef actually says. So thusly it was said in the name of Rav. Keman azlo shmaitzid Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba's ruling about seeking absolution at the conclusion of the day is really based on Rabbi Noson's teaching and Rabbi Noson's attitude toward vows in general. Why does Rabbi Yirmiyah impose this stringency upon someone who took the vow? Well, you'll see the Sanya, Rabbi Noson Omer Kol HaNoder Kilu Bona Boma. Anyone who vows is looked upon negatively. It's as if he built a forbidden altar. V'hamekaimo, and one who fulfills a vow, Kilu Maktir Olah. That's even worse, so to speak. Of course, if you made a vow, you better fulfill it, but it's the whole thing is negative. The fulfillment is as if you offered a sacrifice on the forbidden altar. So as Rashi says, Rav Yirmiyah's requirement of seeking absolution of the vow, and that it's not automatically released, is a chumrah to show that he did not do a proper thing in making the vow in the first place. The Rashi adds, K'Rebbi Noson, Hilkoch tzorch shelo l'chacham d'hoyel v'ovad isura. Since you did something wrong by making the vow in the first place, machmarinan oleh, we impose a stringency upon you, v'ein marin lo shikim nidro mi'atzmo, and we don't let you feel as if you fulfilled the vow on your own, elo k'sheyatiru lo es nidro. That the release from the vow is only through the absolution through a chacham. V'lo mishom gzeira. And this approach is in opposition to the previous approach, the Rav Yosef number A Aleph approach, who said it's because of a gzeira. The Ravino lo svira le de Rav Yosef. And this is why I suggested before in the Yirsa on the fourth line from the top of the Gemara, maybe we should just leave out the Yosef name and read it as Mishmei de Rav, where, as Rashi says here, Ravino doesn't hold from Rav Yosef. So the Gemara here Rashi is elaborating on why specifically over here we will impose this stringency. But for our purposes, by merely understanding that Rav Yirmiyah is based on Reb Nosson, so we have achieved the understanding of what the Gemara wants in the Ravina Bay's explanation. Shabbos zu asur b'chol Shabbos kula. If a person vowed not to drink wine Shabbos zu, so he's forbidden for the whole week. Well, the Gemara says pshita, that's obvious. That's what his vow was. So mahu detema yoimei de Shabbat k'omar. You might have thought that the vow is simply the weekdays, but not including Shabbos itself. Komash Malon, the Mishnah reveals in this teaching when it says Shabbos zu, also b'chol Shabbos kula, the Mishnah also pointed out v'Shabbos l'sha'ovra, that is the point, that is the revealing point of the Mishnah, that Shabbos is included, and that Shabbos zu was not a reference to just the weekdays. Chodesh ze Ozer b'chol hachodesh. Again, chodesh ze Ozer b'chol hachodesh v'rosh chodesh lahaba. When we learned the Mishnah, we pointed out that this point might seem obvious. A person is in the middle of the month and he vowed not to drink wine this month. Rosh Chodesh is not part of the vow. It's the haba. It is attached to the new month, the next month. Well, pshita, is that not obvious? Rosh Chodesh means the beginning of the month. It's part of the new month. So the Gemara answers, ki it's the richa, the Chodesh chaser. The Mishnah, in telling us that Rosh Chodesh is part of the next month, is dealing when the next month is a 29-day month as opposed to a 30-day month. The lunar calendar is such that the months will appear, and here we're saying something in very general terms. I know that those of you who are somewhat scholarly might know that there are different opinions on this matter, but we're going to make a general statement that the lunar type calendar that we observe has alternating 29, 30-day months. So that if the next month is a Chodesh Choser, is a 29-day month, that means that there will be 2 days of Rosh Chodesh that are celebrated or that are observed. And when you have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, the first of the 2 days is actually day 30 of the current month. So the Mishnah is telling us that when you are in the middle of a month and the next month is Choser, that will indicate that the current month, the month in which you vowed, is a mole, a complete month, a 30-day month. And as we just explained, when you have a 30-day month, you will have inevitably a 2-day Rosh Chodesh observance with the onset of the new month. However, the first of those 2 days is really the 30th day of the current month. So the Gemara explains, Mahu detema Rosh Chodesh l'sha'avar have. With that explanation, one might have very easily thought that Rosh Chodesh, certainly the first day of the 2-day Rosh Chodesh, is part of the current month. L'sha'avar means the last month, means the current month. And that first day of Rosh Chodesh should be prohibited in wine consumption. And as a result, v'litzar, and it should be prohibited. Komash Malon, the Mishnah reveals something that's of great value for us. That is, Korule Inishi, people refer to that as Reish Yachav. They call it Rosh Chodesh. They call the 2-day Rosh Chodesh, both days are called Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh means the head of the new month, the head of the month. So that even though technically speaking, the first of those 2 days is the completion of the current month, but that's not the way people perceive it. They perceive those 2 days as being attached to the new month. And therefore, when Rosh Chodesh comes, even though the first of the 2 days is part of the current month, it's not included in the vow. Vows are determined by the way people speak, by the way people perceive things. And in this case, Rosh Chodesh is, just as its name implies, the beginning of the new month. Hence, it's not included in his vow, which was, I'm not going to drink wine this month. The Gemara continues, Shana Zu Ozer b'chol hashana kula. If a person vowed not to drink wine shana zu, so he cannot drink wine for the rest of the year. We have a new marking, and on the side under the Nosei Mivneh heading, the diamond represents Shtei L'shonos Shel Neder Shetzrichim Biur. Two texts, two versions, two vow languages that need clarification. Kainim Yayin Shani Toyim, we're going to see number 1, Yom, not Hayom, not Yom Echad, but Kainim Yayin Shani Toyim Yom. Or, number 2, which will be the next question, Mirz Hashem, we will not deal with it in today's shiur, but Kainim Yayin Shani Toyim Yovel. Yovel is a reference to the Jubilee cycle. The triangles that will appear shortly are Nisyonos Lifshot She'ela Rishona. These are attempts to answer the first query. The Gemara. Ibaylo Omar Kainim Yayin Shani Toyim Yoim. My dine ke hayoim oy ke yoim echad. By saying Shani Toyim Yom, does it mean till nightfall, which would be like Hayom, or is it 24 hours, which is like the Yom Echad example? Toshma mimas nisen. Let us try to answer the question from our Mishnah. Before we go further, let me just tell you the approach the Gemara is going to take. The Gemara will quote from 2 parts of the Mishnah. It'll quote from the first part of the Mishnah and then make an inference, we call a diuk, which would then, the diuk would be the case of Yom, then come to a conclusion with that. And the Gemara then will go on and say, okay, if that's your conclusion, continue reading the Mishnah, a second part of the Mishnah, make an inference, and the inference once again will be Yom, but you'll see a different conclusion. So that by drawing an inference from the 2 different parts of the Mishnah, and both inferences are referring to the very example of Yom, you come out with 2 contradictory results. The Gemara will then say, listen, this first attempt that we have in the triangle is futile, and namely, the Mishnah is not here for drawing inferences. The Gemara. Toshma mimas nisen. So if you're asking about Kainim Yayin Shani Toyim Yoim, let's try to answer it from the Mishnah, which said, Kainim Yayin She'eni Toyim Hayoim. If you say Hayom, so the prohibition lasts until darkness, but just until darkness. Now, that's if you use the Hayom example, Ha-Yoim, that would leave room to say that if you said Yoim, without the Hey in front of the word, Keyoim Echadomi, that means that Kainim Yayin Shani Toyim Yom would be, the wine would be prohibited for 24 hours, just like Yom Echad. Ema Seifa. Well, state the Seifa of our Mishnah. Omar Yom Echad Asur Miyom Liyom. If a person vowed not to drink wine Yom Echad, so he is prohibited for 24 hours. So how does a person prohibit himself 24 hours? By saying Yom Echad. Inference, Ha-Yoim, had he used the expression merely Yom, Ke-Ha-Yom Domi, it would be Ozer only until nightfall. Well, then that contradicts the inference we drew just 2 lines above. Elo meha leko l'mashmamina. From this, meaning from the quotes from our Mishnah, there is nothing to conclude. The Mishnah basically was taught simply, we'll call it at face value, to teach me the rules concerning Hayom, the rule concerning Yom Echad, but not draw any inferences from that. Omar Rav Ashi, Tashma. So Rav Ashi suggests, let's try to answer the question concerning Yom from the following. So we're going to give you an example. You are not going to see Yom in the example, but from this example we're going to try to conclude regarding Yom. Koinim yayin she'ani toim hashana. Person vows not to drink wine, hashana, the year. Nisabra hashana asur ba v'u be'ibura. If the year is extended, and what do we mean by an extension of a year? That is through the addition of an entire month, the month of Adar. And hence, in an Ibur year, in an extended year, we'll have Adar Aleph and Adar Beis. So if a person vowed, let us say, in the beginning of the year and in Tishrei, and he said, that would mean that he's also until next Tishrei. And that will include the extra month that was added to the year. In other words, Hashanah doesn't mean 12 months, but it means till the next month of the same name 1 year later. Now, the Gemara asks, Hey Chidami, what are the circumstances in this source? Even though we gave an example, but that's just for this translation purposes. But what is the case over here? The Gemara continues at the top of Daf Samach Aleph. If it is as the words read. Well, it's obvious. I gave it a very obvious example. If a person made a vow at the beginning of a year, the early part of a year, that he's not going to drink wine Hashanah, so he is going to be prohibited throughout the entire year, including the added month, the leap month, or the leap year that involves the addition of a month. We must make a correction in the explanation we gave. The Gemara understands that the simpler case, more simple than the one I suggested, the simple case of one who said, Kainim Yayin Shnitayim Hashanah, means if someone was in, let us say, the month of Shvat, and he says, I'm not going to drink wine Hashanah. Hashanah would be this year. So of course he is prohibited until Rosh Hashanah, until Tishrei, ushering in the new year. And to say that he's going to be prohibited during the added month, that's obvious. Hence the Gemara says, if that's the case, if it's as the text reads, that he says, I'm not going to be drinking wine this year, and he's he's vowing in the early part of the year, he will be prohibited until Rosh Hashanah. Of course, that will include the added month. So apparently that's not what he said. Otherwise it would be too obvious. Elolav de Omar Shana. He said, Kainim Yayin Shani Toyim Shana. And the Rosh explains, Elolav de Omar Shana. V'agav urchei, I'm reading in the Rosh, Komash Malon de Shana kehashana. Ve'eno Ozer elo ad tashlum hashana. That by saying Shana, it's like saying Hashana, and his prohibition is only until the end of the year. Di havi kamo Shana achas. If Shana was like Shana achas, kevon dinesar ad toch Shana acheres bizman hazeh, my nafkamina biibura. By saying Hashana or Shana achas, that means that you're usher until this date the next year. So then the issue of the added month would be of no consequence. It wouldn't make any difference. All we're interested is in your reaching the same date next year. So therefore, Shana must be then viewed as like Hashana. And that is the revealing point in the source. So the Gemara continues. We'll read again Elolav on the second line from the top. Omar Shana, Alma Shana kehashana dami. Therefore, the use of the term Shana is like Hashana. V'yoim nami kehayoim dine. And by the same token, the term Yom would be like Hayom, meaning he'll be usher only until nightfall. The Gemara says, "Lo, this is not conclusive." Li'olam diomar Hashana. In fact, the vower said, this year, Umahu detemo halochacha roiv hashanim velo is behu ibor. You might have thought that you should follow the majority of years. And the majority of years don't have an extended month to them. And my thinking would have been that in most years where you don't have an added month, so the vow, when you say Hashanah, goes till the end of the month of Elul. Following Elul, of course, is Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of Tishrei. And in a case where you have an added month, so you would go not to the end of Elul, but your vow would go till the end of Av, the month preceding Elul. That's what I would have thought without the Tanaic source. The Komash Malon, what the Tanaic source reveals to us is that if you say Kainim Yayin Shenitayim Hashanah, you in fact are prohibited till the end of Elul, and you'll have to observe your vow throughout the. Your vow will therefore include the leap month as well, the entire month that you had vowed, and you'll continue observing the vow till the end of Elul, just like in a regular year that you would have had to observe your vow until the end of Elul. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.